Hi,
Mhm.
Joki.
Hi, Crystal.
Hi,
Good.
thank you for joining me this morning and for taking time to have a conversation with me. I know we've just come out of an election process in Kenya, so everybody's still a bit, um, but this is a slightly different skew to a conversation, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation and chatting and really learning from you. And before we start, for our audience, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself using the 3 Ps: who you are personally, who you are politically, and who you are professionally.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad for the opportunity to also talk with you. I do look forward to learning as well from you because this is a conversation. As you have said, I'm Njoki Njehu. I am a feminist, a Kenyan feminist. And my activism goes back to being inspired by my mom and other women in our community who I'm 56 years old. I'm going to be 57 in a couple of weeks. And so the journey that brings me here goes back to my mom's activism in the village. But at the time, I did not see it as activism, but the ways in which the women would stand up for each other, support each other, whether it was with, if someone was having a hard time, a woman would, when they went to the market, they would buy a little extra of vegetables or fruits or whatever. The ways in which, now we talk about unpaid care work. Unpaid care work, we did it as kids, where we would be responsible for taking care of our cousins, and our older cousins had taken care of us, etc., etc. So I think that that is who I am. I'm very grounded in that, and often if I'm doing an interview or going somewhere, I would say to my mom, I'm doing this, what do you think? I am back in Kenya now for about 17 years after living in the US for about 20 years. And really glad that I made the move to Kenya to be with my parents and my family, and I'm glad to maintain those connections. Politically, I think at this point the Kenyan elections are the thing that looms large. We had elections. The presidential election, often in Kenya and in many places, actually overshadows everything else that happens. And perhaps two things to say. One is that, more than two. One is that really glad that the elections happened and there was relative calm. Obviously, it is not lost on people who are paying attention that there is a returning officer who was killed. And, I just don't understand why every time we have to have elections that even a single person gets killed, people get hurt, property gets destroyed. But in the recent history of Kenyan elections, this was quite a relatively peaceful election, and I'm glad for that. The other thing that I think is that we have had, even though we did not have a woman presidential candidate as we did in 2012, so almost all the three of the four presidential candidates have women as running mates. And then we have seen more governors, more senators, more MCAs and MPs elected who are women. And I think, everybody is talking about Nakuru as being one of the places, they're sort of the shining example. I am quite concerned because I think there are lots of people who are belittling it, and the patriarchy and misogyny comes to rises in these kinds of situations. And I also think that we are likely to find that the women who have been elected will be judged differently than the men in terms of their performance and their expectations. And I think that for women activists and for feminists in this country, we need to be able to hold the line and make sure that they do their job, but that they are not judged any differently or by a different yardstick. And lastly, concerned that, you know, the runner-up is conceding because it's not conceding or is going to court, has not conceded, and is going to court because I think, unfortunately, no matter what merits there may be to their cause, Kenyans are just now tired that, you know, for every election that Raila Odinga has run in, he has contested, which is his right. And I think that our elections are actually better. They are better systems precisely because he has had these contestations. But I think Kenyans are tired. Kenyans are ready to, you know, to say we did our best, and this is what the elections are. So politically, that is where we are. On a professional level, I think all of these personal and political things come together because you can't put them in different compartments. And professionally, I think that the thing I think we all have to do is to hold to account the new administration or the regime or whatever you want to call it. They have made promises. We have been having demands about whether it is the policies that were put in place during COVID, can they be maintained? Can they be made permanent? Because we know that they worked and they really made a difference in people's lives. But we know that the campaigning and the governing are very different. My prediction is that when they come and they say, you promise this, we are finding the debt, the IMF conditionality, our hands are tied. I think we will hear a lot of that. But I think that as Kenyans, we have an obligation and a mandate to hold them to account and to make sure that they deliver and to really, you know, this hustler narrative, can we put it to test? You know, let's not just rest on our laurels, or let's not just decide the election is over, let them now have their time to eat, or however it's going to be. So politically, I think, and professionally, those two things come together, and they come together to say the elections are done, but here we are now. Not very much has changed. And I think this is one of the things, the things that people in Kenya have been saying, and why perhaps these elections have been a little bit different. And what have they been saying? Whoever wins, it doesn't put bread on my table, it doesn't put ugali in my cupboard or whatever. So how do we then operationalize that realization in terms of the demands that we make to the administration and to our elected leaders at all levels,
Great, thank you, Njoki. Yeah, the women's question in Kenya, I think this is the first election we've had. I think we've elected in more women than we've ever done in all of our history. So that's really something. And I think I wasn't the biggest fan of the women's rep position. I felt like it was lazy. It was a lazy way to get women into government. But to be honest, and I know a couple of people on my Twitter timeline have been noticing, there's been a number of women who've used the women's rep position as sort of a transitioning space to transition to governor, MP, you know, senator, different positions. So I'm not entirely hating it, to be honest, now, and really proud. Like you say, we handled it really well. We, you know, did our part and voted peacefully. We seem to have faith in our institutions, which is really, I have been really proud in the last few days. Of course, there's been its fair share of drama, but I think we're growing, and these are growing pains that make us better with each election. And speaking about
Crystal,
work,
let me just say this, that, you know, in the ward where I come from and where I vote, I actually live in Nairobi, but I vote, I'm from Kiambu, I vote in the village where I grew up. In that ward, we have never elected a woman. In the previous term, there was a woman who was a nominated MCA, and she won the election this time around, which, you know, the UDA wave and all of that aside, she won. and she won against the incumbent. And actually, there was the incumbent, there was the former MCA, former councillor, the guy who had been there before, at one time was even chair of the Kiambu County Council, as it was called in those days. And, you know, I say this, you know, with a little sadness. The guy, the incumbent, is a relative, not just like a distant, like a close relative and a friend of mine. And he was defeated. But I'm glad he was defeated by a woman. I would have been, I mean, the loss would have been sharper in my view. I'm sure it is sharp for him. It would have been sharper if he had been defeated by any one of these other guys. But I think that what is really important about this election and the election of a woman, because I'm telling you, as much as Central Kenya thinks of other regions as being backward, in terms of electing women, we are miles and miles behind. I remember maybe about 2007 or so meeting a woman from Turkana who had been elected a councillor in 1978. I mean, in Turkana, a woman elected in 1978. Yeah. So these are some of the things, and I think that idea that the women's rep position is a transition space, I think it's really important. And those spaces, I think, tend to play a role, both, you know, ring fencing a space, because women are mostly kept out of those other spaces. So when that space is ring fenced and women are seen as leaders, being able to shine without the usual tussle and battle in a patriarchal space. They're still in a patriarchal space, but that ring fencing is important. So yeah, I think that I too am proud of Kenya and the Kenyan electorate this week.
Yeah.
Let's see how
And I think maybe we can have a whole podcast on like sort of talking about women in leadership in Kenya and the continent. I think there's so much to talk about. But talking about spaces, you work for Fight Inequality Alliance, and I'll ask you to tell us a little bit about that. But you also lead work with Daughters of Mumbi, and I'd also like you very briefly to like just explain a little bit about that, and then we go on to talking about, you know, the space of the Global Organising School, which Fight Inequality is working on. So I invite you to take us through just very briefly on Daughters of Mumbi and the role that you play with Fight Inequality Alliance and what it is.
Thanks. So I think it's important to say that, as I said, I was living in the US for 20 years, and I was coming back and really struggling to figure out what was it that I was going to do when I came back. I was very unfamiliar with the Kenyan sort of NGO scene, having never worked in Kenya other than, you know, a couple of years where I was a UT provisional teacher after my A-levels, and then I went to the US. I had never worked in the space, as I think we all know, is quite complicated. So Daughters of Mumbi Global Resource Center was the idea and the form that my return and my activism took. I had spent more than 10 years working on global economic justice, challenging the power and the role of the World Bank and the IMF. And I was trying to figure out, when I come back to Kenya, what am I going to do? And DOM was the child of myself, co-founded by myself, my mom, who I mentioned, my mother, Njoki Njehu, who worked with Wangari Maathai and was among the group of women who co-founded the Greenbelt movement. So her activism had been very much in the community, in the church, and it continues, but also with the Greenbelt movement. And then the late Mary Wanjiku Kenodia, who was a friend of my mom's. And the idea of DOM was this idea of doing family and community level food security.
And just for DOM is Daughters of Mumbi.
Yes, Daughters of Mumbi. And using food security as the entry point, and then having the conversation. The lessons, let me say, from the Greenbelt movement, that, you know, you had women planting trees, but you used tree planting as an entry point. And then you talked about governance, you talked about peace, you talked about all kinds of things. And that is what we were doing. and took 4 meanings of the name Mombi. Most people think of Mombi, when they hear Mombi, they think, oh, Kikuyu or whatever, but we actually took 4 meanings. Mombi means the first mother, obviously, of the Kikuyu people, but this was about looking at culture and the role that it plays, embracing culture and the role it plays in our lives. The second meaning of Mombi is Mobi the potter. In Kikuyu, Mobi means, potter, maker of pots. And this was around the work of our hands, and talking especially about women's work, but also about the role, especially of young people who are looking for jobs, and talking about jobs and work, the difference between that. The other meaning of Mombi as a community, and the idea of the values that would come with that. And then the fourth meaning of looking at the environment and talking about human beings as a species worth saving. So those four meanings, and that work continues because, again, it informs whether it's the work on inequality, whether it's the work on climate, whether it's the work on women land rights, which are all things that we work on. And I find that space really useful so that you're not disconnected. So you're not really just, talking about any number of issues. That it's from watching things happening over there. So when we are talking about what was happening to women under COVID, we literally did surveys with members of Daughters of Mombi Global Resource Center. We had them pair up these elder women who don't know how to use smartphones with their grandchildren to help them so that we could have those conversations. We had them come in and, once the easing of lockdown had happened, and have the conversation about how they are coping, so that it is informed in a way by real life experiences of people. And I find that really healthy for me. I find it inspiring. I find it that it keeps me honest. And it leads to the work that we do with Fight Inequality Alliance, which is then looking about the struggles and the issues that these women are having, that communities are having. How do we attack them from a structural level? Our friend, Dr. Akech, talks about the Oye story, where somebody will tell you a story that is so demobilizing and so sad that all you can say is Oye, and there's nothing you can do about that. But when you're having these conversations with people, with communities that are about the challenges that they face, and then there is expectation about supporting and working with them to overcome that. That's where Fight Inequality Alliance comes in. It is about challenging the structural inequalities. Why is it that women are being denied their land right? Why is it that a certain community is experiencing extrajudicial killings? Why is it that when women experience sexual and gender-based violence in certain contexts, it doesn't go away? It doesn't get handled in a way that protects the dignity and the rights of those women. So what are structural inequalities, the structural impediments of that? And this is the work that Fight Inequality Alliance is doing, bringing together movements, international organizations, individual activists and artists, environmental groups, to really have that conversation and to make that connection, the intersectionality of that as a woman, I may be experiencing sexual and gender-based violence, but I may also be experiencing the ravages of climate change. I may be having my land rights violated. And what does that mean? I want to share a learning that I had about women land rights. Daughters of Mombi, with many other organizations, was engaged with the Women to Kilimanjaro initiative, which in 2016, so 34 African women climbed Kilimanjaro to declare that we wanted our land rights honored from all different countries. It wasn't just Kenya or Tanzania. Women came from Nigeria, from Togo, from South Africa, from across the African continent. And that work is partly what really Daughters of Mombi anchors in the Fight Inequality Alliance. But when we came around the table, if you will, at Fight Inequality Alliance Kenya, we got to know members of other communities. And in particular, I want to talk about the community in Dandora. And as we were talking about that, one of the things that we realized is that there are all of these women who live in Dandora. And it came to be revealed that many of those women had ended up in Dandora because their land rights had been violated. They were widows who were disinherited. And even though the Kilimanjaro initiative was about rural women, in fact, that gathering in Arusha with about 400 women was a rural women's assembly. We had not made that connection. And I think that is the wonderful things that happens when people come around the table. You think you know and you understand. And in this case, we were limited in our understanding of women land rights in the Kenyan context, thinking that it was all about rural women. But many of the women, because if you are a rural woman from Siaya or even from Kiambu or Nyeri or Busia, when you are chased out of your marital home, where are you going to go? You're not going to go to another village. Chances you're going to go to an urban area. So they end up in Dandora, they end up in Kibra, in Mukuru, and in all the other ways, all the other spaces. So this is the thing or the lessons that you learn when you're working with people in community. Because honestly, among the people who had been working on Women to Kilimanjaro, they were world-class, women's land rights experts, but this was a new revelation. And I think that is the thing about having an alliance like FIA that brings people from different communities, from different areas of work, because in that conversation you have these realizations that culture, yes, plays a role, but there is patriarchy, there is misogyny, there is other things, there is laws or legal frameworks that don't support women or that don't support the rights of certain people.
Yeah, Lynn Osome talks about how processes need to go from the concrete, so real life issues, into the abstraction or theorization, but always must come back to the concrete. And I think Fight Inequality Alliance is a really interesting and really great seminal piece of advocacy and community mobilizing. It looks at right from community work and struggles and into abstraction and policy spaces, but right back into community and how do we make sure that we're building better lives for all. So it's really interesting work. I'm really happy to be affiliated with Fight Inequality Alliance and to be working shoulder to shoulder with the likes of you who are, have been in the space, continuously fight so tirelessly and know the struggles in a very intimate way. When you talk about Daughters of Mumbi and the way it infiltrates, it's also very clear to see this picture that's painted that all oppression is linked, and we must always remember that. And it sort of feels like the theme of this conversation is spaces. And I know Fight Inequality Alliance, which you call FIA, so if I say FIA, people will know what I mean, is beginning to think about organizing a global organizing school. And I really want to learn a little bit more about the Global Organizing School. Where did the idea come from? Why is it important? Who are you targeting? And I know there's a countering to this wave of neoliberalism that has taken root in multiple ways and facets, and how this Global Organizing School will be a way to confront that and push back on this growing neoliberal world that we're living in, especially now as we try and navigate outside of COVID.
Yeah, well, they say that the stories that we tell, that we tell them there are iterations that are different, but it is the same story. But I think that for Fight Inequality Alliance, it brings different pieces of stories together. And part of the founding of Fight Inequality Alliance was that there was a moment where Greenpeace, Amnesty, Oxfam, ActionAid, were all led by people from the Global South. For many years, for decades, those organizations had been led by Global North people, allies, etc. But at this point, it was leaders from what we call the majority world, the global south. And I think I understand, I wasn't there, but I understand there was a conversation about what difference are we going to make? We are in charge of these powerful global organizations. What's the difference are we going to make? And that's where the idea of the Fight Inequality Alliance came from. Similarly, with the Global Organizing School, I think it would be true to say that it comes out of this experience of the last few years organizing in different countries. Fight Inequality Alliance is active in about 35 countries. Not in all of the. We do not have national alliances formed in all of those countries, but we have formations that take different bodies, if you will, have that differ from one place to another. And in those places, one of the things that I think we are finding is that organizing, mobilizing, activism is changing. And one of the things that I think is might be even in some cases a fatal flaw of technology is that people tend to kind of leapfrog. You are on Twitter or you are on Facebook and you see something and you get moved, inspired, and you leapfrog to taking action without necessarily going through the journey that gets you to understand what is going on. In the old days, it used to be said that there was a story that was told of people, some northern activists or NGOs went into a community and they found that there were many children under 5 dying because of, and the usual things. And they decided that the thing they needed to do was to build a clinic, and they did. But the number of deaths did not stop. So when they traced back, they realized that actually the problem was the source of water. The water was contaminated. And when they changed the source of water or they provided safe drinking water, then the number of deaths stopped. And it's that kind of leapfrogging that I'm talking about, where you see a problem and you decide this is the solution and you don't understand the terrain. And I think we find that a lot. And I think for the Global Organizing School, it's this idea of actually embedding and imbibing our activism with some ideology and with some understanding of the context. We've seen even in the Kenyan election where people make all kinds of statements, not understanding how we came from the 90s and the struggle for the second liberation to where we are, not understanding the important role that Raila Odinga has played. I mean, whoever he is now, he is that guy from the 90s who fought, who was detained by the Kenyatta regime and the Moi regime. Like that, where we are is a function of the struggles that he and other people have engaged in. And but that people don't necessarily recognize that there's perennial challenges to the results have given us actually things that make the elections more viable and more, what is the word that I'm looking for? The
Credible.
The credibility, yes, credible is the credibility of the 2022 elections has come out of struggle and out of the contestations that Raila and others have engaged in. So with Fight Inequality Alliance, we have a lot of activists. They are engaged, they are excited, they are, they have a lot of energy, but the grounding, the analysis, the understanding, even the history of what it has taken for us to get here is missing. So the ideological understanding, I find activists who, and I think we all have been in this space where where you think someone is very radical and the proposal that they're making or the solution that they're offering is deeply, deeply embedded in neoliberalism. This is why all the programs, that, whether from UN Women, maybe I shouldn't be naming, but you have all these programs where people are suggesting that what needs to happen to empower women is that women are going to empower themselves through entrepreneurship. And you have people talking about the market and people talking about the ways in which, these very traditional and very extractive systems are how women need to go, and not really offering or even creating the possibility that there may be something else that women can do in order to empower themselves, that does not require them to be doing table banking, that does not require them to be doing any number of the perennial or pyramid schemes, I call them, the pig farming, the dairy goats, the fish ponds, the quails, the rabbits. I mean, I call them pyramid schemes that come and women get all mobilized and then it falls flat. And women are again looking for the next one, and it's tweaked a little bit, and this is how it's going to be different, and this is how it's going to pull you out of poverty. And some people do manage, but it is not that mass deliverer of women from poverty. In fact, all of those things have a piece where they're asking women to be resilient, where they're asking women to do more with less than what is expected of men or even sometimes youths. So this is the challenge that we have, and that the Global Organizing School is looking to do, where people who already have an affinity, who are already liking the idea of being activists, but they are young. It's targeting young, inexperienced. So if you are an activist who has a nice resume, usually this is what would get you into a program like this. If you have a long resume of participating in this and doing, you are not the candidate. This is about young up and coming activists, so that they are grounded and they are given skills. Because I don't think that we also need to have people learning how to be activists the hard way, the way some of us did. You kind of, managed and you fell into it, and you found you were good at this aspect of organizing or being an activist. Maybe you're a good spokesperson, but maybe you are really terrible at writing proposals. Maybe you are like all different kinds of things, but like it gives you an opportunity to learn and to teach, because they also have a lot of things that there are so many innovative things that young people are doing, but it's also about how you translate that exciting, innovative thing into something that actually delivers.
Yeah.
So you're not just on Twitter insulting whoever, but that actually you have a proposal that you're making, saying the roads in my neighborhood are bad, the security is bad, this is what we need, because it's sometimes easier just to point and not to have a proposal.
So this is what we need, and this is how we can get there. So how do we engage in budget processes, for example, and all of those spaces that are available to us. My question also is, what age group are you looking to engage for the Global Organizing School, and what regions of the continent?
Okay, so the Global Organizing School is looking at youth, and youth is a very controversial category. Some people, and when you talk with activists, they're like, oh, what are you going with the UN, the UN categorization, or who are you going with? And the thing is that we did, for lack of a better scale, we did go with the idea that it is youth. We are actually looking at, it's a global organizing school. So in South America, we are looking at Mexico, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru. In Asia, we're looking at the Philippines, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. And in Africa, we are looking at Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, South Africa, and Tanzania. And Tanzania is also where the MS training school in Arusha is. So we thought that it made sense to actually have some people from Tanzania, even though the alliance is not very strong in Tanzania. We had the United Kingdom as well. And honestly, I don't know what is happening with that. And I also think, did I mention Indonesia for Asia? No, I didn't actually. I'm looking at my list here. Indonesia is the other country that has been added to the. Looking at having 2 people from each of those countries. That they would be young people who are activists and somewhat engaged either in FIA, in Fight Inequality Alliance, or in a member organization, that they have a home. So it's not an INGO, individual non-governmental organization, but that it is someone who is actually part of a movement or part of part of an organization, because we see that their home, their activist home, as being the place that then nurtures them and holds them accountable and also gives them a place to land, so that it's not just that you go through this 9-month training. It's a 9-month training with a residential component at the beginning and at the end. After the beginning happens after some kind of activation and engagement with each other in the region and in the country, because some of these people don't even know each other in the region or even in the country. So it will then have a residential, a 2-week, 10-day to 2-week residential component. And then at the end, also a residential component, and also opportunities to engage with FIA or Fight Inequality Alliance mobilizations globally, regionally, and as well in the countries where they're found.
Great. What a group you're going to have, and what change this world is going to have after they've been through this 9-month school. And my last question, because we have, a few minutes left, how do people find more about it? How do people apply? Where should they go? Should they tweet you? Should they WhatsApp you? Should they write an email? How do you get? Yeah. Is there an application process?
It's really not an open in that way that you just apply, because as I said, this is the first cohort that we are doing, and right now the way we've done it is that it is we have asked the different countries and the formations in those countries to nominate two young people or 2 young activists. So it's not like I don't know, the London School of Economics or the university or this or that, where anyone can apply, but that it was targeted, because we also want to make sure that there's a commitment and a link. There's a commitment to continue this work within the Fight Inequality Alliance universe, if you will, member organization or the national formation itself, because it is a huge investment, both financially, but also time. We will be calling upon activist allies like yourself and others that are part of the alliance to be the teachers or the co-learners with the young people, because it's always surprising how much one learns from some of these young people in terms of the ways that in which they engage and what inspires them and how they move forward. So it's that bit of getting their energy, their inspiration, and all of that, and sort of directing it, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word, but so that you understand that it's not just enough to shout, as I said before, to shout, sometimes to insult, which is something that we find easy to do sometimes, but that you take that inequality, you take that injustice, and then propose a response from government. Fight Inequality Alliance strongly believes that government has a role to play to address inequality. for many decades, in our countries in the South, there was this whole idea that, oh, they were corrupt and, the only way you could get them to do anything, even in this country, there was a time when it was like, if you had any beef or any question or issue with government, or what you needed to do was, appeal to the development partners. That is not where we are coming from. We are coming from where our agency, our rights are what we put forward, and the proposals that we give about how government needs to respond.
Great. Thanks, Njoki. This has been really a learning space for me. I've learned so much about the Global Organizing School, but also been really inspired by your personal story and how you've been able to link the work that you've done with the debt justice movement globally, coming back home, setting up Daughters of Mombi, and how that really feeds into the Fight Inequality Alliance, and coming back, right? And how it's an iterative process where lessons learned from communities feed into global and regional work and come right back. What a story, what an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining me, for sharing your time. I know that Fight Inequality Alliance is really vibrant in sharing out lessons learned and the journeys that you're taking. So we're really excited to follow the Global Organizing School. I know it's going to be everywhere on social media, and you're going to be probably doing case studies on it and have sections of it on your website. So we will be sharing out links, and really looking forward to the next Fight Inequality Alliance Festival too, and all the amazing work that you do in such a different, passionate way. So just for me, a really big thank you. And we're looking forward to all the rest of the work, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Crystal. And I look forward to engaging. We are looking at doing a tribunal on debt and austerity so that people really get to talk about how this impacts them. It's not just the IMF or finance ministries kind of that, but people telling their stories. And this is the thing that I think it's really important about. We tell our stories and then we figure out how we move forward. We don't have the money, perhaps not the influence, but we have the numbers. And whether it's Davos, whether it's the World Bank IMF meetings, whether it is our own finance ministries, we are going to hold them to account. In Kenya, the new regime, the governors who have been elected, the parliament, we are on it. We want to hold you to task and to the promises that you have made, so that it doesn't become that you are campaigning. When it comes to governing, then you have to deliver. And I thank you, Crystal, also for the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it is important to really interrogate and have the sharing that comes from an interview like this. So thank you for inviting me, and please have me back again.
For sure. We have so much to talk about. Bye,
Yes.
Njoki.
Bye.